into one of the ledgers. Hi, I'm in New York's JFK Airport. Thought I'd talk today about the difference between a cut-in and an add-on ledger. Some instances, sometimes we have to make changes to our data supply chain. One type of change that sometimes is made is adding on a new ledger onto the end of an existing data supply chain. This happens, for instance, quite often when two companies come together. They determine that neither of the ledgers are adequate for the reporting processes, and so they add on a new ledger onto the end of those two data supply chains, bringing the two ledgers together in some way by establishing a new chart of account, new business processes around that. If either one of the ledgers had been adequate, they might have simply mapped from one ledger into another, or they might have done away with one ledger completely and simply had all of the feeds go directly into one of the ledgers. But an add-on ledger puts another layer onto the end of the data supply chain. It opens up the flexibility to define a new chart of account, but of course the chart of account that's added on and the ledger that's added on is completely dependent upon the values that were passed to it. You can't make up data that was lost in an intermediate ledger as you get to a later ledger. So this is often a problem with an add-on ledger. It increases the length of the data supply chain. It increases the number of adjustment points. Yes, it does bring data together and give a better view perhaps in some ways, but that's one of the limitations of doing an add-on ledger. Another change that's often made to a data supply chain is a cut-in ledger. Cut-in ledger tries to go in the middle of an existing data supply chain in some way. When we do this process, the middle of the process gives us problems because ledgers are dependent very much upon the data structures that are defined for them. The posting keys defined it for the ledgers. The input processes map into those posting keys, but then the output processes often use those posting keys in producing reports and determining what will be reported and how the selection processes for report processes, aggregations, ownership, accountability, all of those things are often dependent upon the posting key. When we do a cut-in ledger, that posting key becomes something we have to determine, okay, how far downstream for my new ledger am I going to make changes? If I go replace the entire downstream, then it really wasn't a cut-in process, it was an add-on ledger. I replaced the whole back end of the system. If I decide to really cut in, do I go make some changes relative to the posting keys every place that it's specifically dependent upon that? Or do I try to do something quick and dirty, which is doing a reverse mapper? A reverse mapper is something that some people sometimes use, but this then has kind of the same problems as the add-on ledger. It's completely dependent upon the existing structure of the existing ledger. When I try to reverse map, I can't change the number of rows that result in my new ledger for downstream, because downstream is expecting one row for an existing posting key. I can't now make it two rows. That will break the downstream processes in some way. So the reverse mapper limits the kinds of changes I can make to my posting keys, the kinds of values that I can keep within my ledger and report on in the downstream processes without having a large impact upon them. These posting keys are embedded in our organizations all over the place, and in many organizations they've been there for years, and in some instances they've been there for decades. Some cases, in like subledgers, the posting keys are still used internally in the subledger, but since cut-on and add-on ledgers were added on post-subledger processing, they translated out of the existing posting key for those subledgers, and those posting keys, those subledger charts never see the light of day in any reports anymore. The only people that know about these things are the people that maintain those systems. They have to be conversant with what those things mean, and they have to know how to translate into any of the downstream posting keys that are used. The process of determining what our posting key is going to be is a critical decision that is made whenever we implement one ledger, because changing the posting keys after the fact are difficult to do. It's not that they're impossible to do. In fact, you can change the posting keys in some level simply during operational processes by changing the accounting rules or reclassing data to new positions and those kinds of things. So there's changes that can go on in this space, but wholesale changes, large structural changes, are very difficult to do. One thing that I think an instrument ledger, a metric engine would give us is the ability to maintain data at a lower level of detail. And so the posting key, although it still is important for maintaining what our chart of balances are that we're going to maintain against any of the data supply chains supported by that instrument ledger, that's still important. It doesn't have to have all the meaning embedded in it that a traditional chart would have embedded in it, because we have so much more detail and can pivot to any one of the views that we're interested in. I think that's one of the major benefits of a metric engine that would help alleviate any of the problems that come with cut-in or add-on ledgers.